So foreign media outlets, including the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times, have been tuning into the Korean economy lately. The journal said foreign investors are, quote, stampeding into Korea, buying up stocks for 37 days straight as of today to mark the longest buying spree on record. Now, and that's on top of the IMF's latest report that Korea is among the countries best positioned to weather any kind of global market volatility that may come after the U.S. begins winding down its stimulus program. Now, is the Korean economy really that stable, and does that perspective from overseas match the current situation? Joining us live in the studio to give us an analysis is Dr. Byoung-joo, head of KLMP Consulting and our regular commentator on this program. Good afternoon to you, Dr. Kim.
Good afternoon.
So the international media have been expressing a lot of optimism about the Korean economy,
right,
for sure, in recent days. Now, how is this different from the past?
The thing is, ever since the 1990s, when Korea experienced big-time economic crisis, then we've been hearing rounds of praises in the past so far. But the thing is, as far as I remember, main forms of phrase or the origin of this phrase, I remember, were usually credit rating agencies. They often regularly praise or evaluate Korea's economy and issue these words of praising. The thing is, however, the world's mainstream economic media or economic or business media, such as Wall Street Journal or Financial Times, they have not been as much forthcoming in terms of praising Korea in the past so far. And I think there are different reasons. Often the correspondent here, they seem to have some kind of a thorny relationship with the government officials here in the past and often complain about the lack of openness, talking about the glass half empty rather than half full. What's missing, what's lacking. They often talk a lot about what needs to be further done in Korea. That has been the tendency that I personally noticed with regard to mainstream business media such as Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times in the past several decades or so. And even as recently as 2-3 years ago, I think there has been the tendency. But now this is something very, very much new the way I see it. And I think there are several reasons why we are seeing this. The government trying to open the economy and liberalize the economy as much as they can, as well as also doing the so-called right policies, setting example for other economies and so on. I'm sure that has made much difference. But whatever the reason would be, as you mentioned, what we are looking at this point is something quite different from what we have been seeing in the past.
Right. So would you say there are as much change as reported in these media reports in actual quantitative indicators that show global confidence levels?
Depending on which one you're looking at. For instance, CDS premium, credit default swap premium that you place on for sovereign debt and so on. That indicator has been kind of reflecting the overall improving mood of the mainstream media for sure all around the globe. But other indicators such as the credit rating itself offered by S&P and Moody's and Fitch, they have not been raised dramatically recently. And if you ask me whether it will be raised as a result of this kind of media reports anytime soon, I wouldn't bet on any change this coming month in November. Perhaps early next spring, perhaps March or April, I think, would be the time where we will get to see these kind of improvements. But to answer your question, it depends on which one you're looking at, but definitely the media coverage has been much more positive.
Well, so going back to those media reports, some experts in Korea do not seem happy at all about these inflow because they're concerned about hot money inflows now, meaning that they're afraid that a lot of money inflows could just be gushing out at one certain point.
Right, I think so. I mean, I'm sure they're happy, but they're not thrilled about this, supposedly. As you mentioned at the beginning of this segment, 37 days of continuous purchase by the foreign investors of Korean stocks here. That's a new record here, pushing the Kospi over 2,053 today. It just shows there is enthusiasm in the capital market. And they're saying that this time the buyers of these Korean stocks from overseas, main the majority is American investors who tend to invest in longer terms than European investors. So that's a little bit comforting. But still, the surging of the capital inflow, because of our experience in the past, like 2008, 2004, and back in at the end of 1990s and so on, we have been burnt big time. So we're not totally feeling comfortable about this surge of the foreign capital, whether they're hot money or not. That could be disputed, but still, the dramatic inflow itself is not something that people are very much thrilled about.
Right, so we do remain cautious on that front.
Right.
However, to prevent a sudden outflow of foreign capital, as many are worried about, we know that we need to focus on the fundamentals. Now, how are we doing in terms of that?
When we're talking about fundamentals, we may be actually talking about a very wide scope of variables here, indicators here, such as the macroeconomic indicator that we often watch, such as the balance of current accounts, for instance, a trade account, and also going beyond the macroeconomic indicators, the conditions of the industries itself is a very important one. Key industries which Korea rely upon, how they're doing and how the key players are doing, that's very important. And overall financial indicators for Korean corporations. These days we have been hearing some of these scandals and so on, but that's an important part of the indicator as well. And also overall liquidity in the market. Nowadays, as I mentioned, concern is too much of the liquidity rather than a lacking of it. So that's one. And lastly, for Korea, of course, the geopolitical variable is very important. And North Korea discount that we've been talking about has been always there in terms of calculating, what kind of the fundamentals, so-called, that foreign investors are looking at.
So once again, we are reminded that we need to care more about the long-term issues rather than just being excited about this short-term global reactions to the Korean market.
Right.
Now, what's your analysis on the prospects?
The thing is, in terms of track record for Korea, we've been doing always consistently really well in terms of macroeconomic indicators, for instance, right?
Trade surplus, for it.
Trade surplus, current account balance, and all that. We've been doing very good. My concern is the industry side. We have very big players dominating some of the very small number of industries that are leading the Korean economy. So that means, remember what happened in IT industry recently, BlackBerry and Nokia, all these big players going down. So indeed, that kind of lack of balance itself in the industry is a big cause of concern, at least in my mind. And the other one is this corporate financing overall, especially excluding the biggest ones, but the ones right below it. Some of these corporations that are being discussed at this point these days as a form of kind of like a financial scandal these days in Korea, right? Second-rate size. Those corporations I have in mind in terms of concerns. Liquidity side, I mean, it's an issue that we already talked about. And overall, North Korean issue is very important indeed because foreign investors do not have enough information about it. So for government, it's very important to share clear information and clear understanding about how we see North Korean threats with world community. So those will be the efforts that are needed in order to further enhance Korea's image in the global market.
Right. So it's a welcome news that we're seeing all these foreign investors coming into the Korean market. Now is the question or the task of keeping them here with their money.
Exactly.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Kim Byoung-joo, for today. We'll talk to you tomorrow with other news.
Okay.